Hello and welcome to this pre-recorded session for MPC's flagship conference, Ignites. I'm Nicola Pritchard, a senior consultant at MPC, and I'm program manager for My Best Life, the program we will be discussing today. I'm joined by my colleague Kathryn, who is product manager on My Best Life, and together we'll be sharing an overview of the program and what we've learned about taking a user-centered approach to design and development. Before we get going, I should say that whilst watching the session, if you have any questions or comments, do join the conversation on Twitter using the hashtag NPCIgnites and follow the Twitter handle at NPCThinks. So before we get going, Kathryn, would you mind sharing your screen? Great. So as I said, we'll be covering an overview of the My Best Life project. We'll be looking at an introduction to user-centered design, how user-centered design has been put into practice through My Best Life, and our reflections on the process so far and where we're going next. So what is My Best Life? So we started this project back in 2018, working closely with young people aged 18 to 25 in the London Borough of Camden, who face multiple challenges from language barriers to workplace discrimination to unstable housing. We wanted to understand what helps them move forward and what holds them back from the life that they dream of. The key challenges that they talked about could be broadly grouped into three categories: having a stable home, building a career, and having meaningful social engagement or connection to the local community. This in front of you is an interactive map showcasing the key findings of what supports and what hinders young people. It highlighted the importance of key footholds, such as having access to the right tools and networks, but also the role of gatekeepers, such as social workers, in supporting young people. These are all huge issues that we couldn't tackle alone. So we looked across the three areas and we found that across all three, young people weren't able to get the support and services that they need to help them along their way. Next slide, please. So given the enormity of the challenge, we can't do this alone, and we're relying on a number of really important partners for the work. Our charity partners, The Mix, UK Youth, Leap Confronting Conflict, and Founders and Coders, and our generous funders, Paul Hamlin Foundation and Zing. We're working very closely with our charity partners through a project steering group, and I know Kathryn will be sharing a little bit more about other structures that we have in place to help ensure that we take the right approach throughout. Next slide, please. So over the course of 2019, we carried out further exploratory research with young people, looking at how tech could help find the services they need and how we could also improve the quality and inclusivity of services. We did some rapid prototyping and developed 3 smoke test products, some of which were done in the peak of lockdown, and I'm sure you'll be hearing more on this from Kathryn in a minute. But in June 2020, we transitioned into phase 3 of My Best Life. And from the lessons learned in the previous phase, we've decided to hone in on this challenge in front of you: discovery. How can technology help young people find the services they need? We're addressing 2 problems here, both the visible problem being that young people can't find what they need, but the invisible problem, and possibly the biggest sort of nut to crack, is that there is a lack of good quality joined up data on services and opportunities for young people. Our rationale for tackling this problem first is actually quite detailed, but the 2 most important reasons for focusing here were that young people engage with this topic the most in our research so far, and we also believe that tackling the issue of how young people find services and opportunities will help lay the foundations for addressing gaps in services and the quality of provision. So what's our long-term vision? Our vision for the end of this, for sort of why we're doing this work, is that we want young people to be able to find and engage with services and opportunities in their areas that meet their needs and interests at the times when they need it, and in ways that give them the control over how they engage. We know that this will involve working very differently with data and services, and that it'll involve mapping and codifying data in new ways, so that the data and so the content on what's available speaks to young people on their terms. So our secondary objective in this work is that at a local level, ecosystems involving local authorities, health providers, youth charities and so on will become more open and collaborative and agile in how they work and how they share and improve their data. So how will we get there? Firstly, we're developing a proof of concept as a progressive web app to be tested in the market, helping young people find services. We'll also be sharing our learning on the process we're going through to get to that point, to inspire a shift in the sector. As part of that, we hope to embed meaningful co-design as a critical part of developing products and services that young people benefit from. We have 2 key questions that we'll be asking ourselves along the design and development process. Which aspects of the app improve or hinder young people's ability to find services and opportunities? That might be related to how data is integrated and categorized, how the user experience lands with young people, how the branding or look and feel of the app helps or hinders young people's experience of the service. And then secondly, which aspects of the process that we're taking, the approach that we're taking, leads to better buy-in and sharing of information at a local level, be that through consultation, be that with how we engage with youth workers and the local authorities, and how they in turn engage with charities, for instance. So lots to find out through this work. And when thinking about our objectives and the key questions we're asking ourselves along the way, how are we involving young people in helping us answer these questions, helping us to improve that resulting solution? So I'm going to hand over to Kathryn to introduce user-centred design and what it means for this work and how we'll be taking that forward.
Hi everyone, yes, so as Nick mentioned, I'm Kathryn and I'm the product manager on the My Best Life project, and I've been involved in the last couple of phases. So I'm going to talk to you guys now about our approach to user-centred design and a little bit about what user-centred design actually is, for those who might not know. So if you could go to the next slide, Nick, please. Great. So this is a quote that I think is a really good one, and it's from the Interactive Design Foundation. And it says that user-centred design is an iterative design process where we focus on the users and their needs at every single phase. And I'm going to talk through with you guys today about how we have done that so far and where we're going next. But it is, the most important thing about it is that it's about direct engagement with users. So you need to go out and actually do direct research and testing with users. And so there's a sort of 4-part stage in which a process that you can go through. So obviously I've added in a 5th box because I didn't want to ignore it, but there is an implicit assumption that you have decided what your problem is and that there is a need for a user-centered design process. So they haven't actually included that in this diagram, but I sort of added it in just to make sure that you're really clear on that. But once you have that, you should have a really good understanding of the context in which your user or young person operates in. So this is just understanding how does this fit into their life? What part of their life is this involved in? So no website stands alone. It's always a method to getting to somewhere. And you want to really understand where it fits and how it kind of fits into their world. Then you want to know what specifically they require. So what features and functions do they need in order to feel that their needs are being met and that they're able to pursue whatever goal you've got in mind. And then once you have a better understanding of that, you can then move on to designing solutions. So a lot of people won't necessarily know what will help them, but they'll know the pain points and they'll know the bits that they get really stuck on currently. So then you can go away and start to explore those in more detail. But one of the other things that's most important is to evaluate that. So have a look back at what all their pain points were and have you actually met those. The whole point of this is to understand, is the product actually solving the right problem and the one that you set out to do? And this can be based on insights from users, but ultimately you don't want to go and just do your best guess at what users need. You have to actually put it in the hands of users. And it's not until you put it in the hands of users that you'll really understand how they're actually going to use it and how it's actually going to sort of be implemented in their life. So you want to explore all sort of assumptions such as the usability, the usefulness of it, the desirability of it, and the value of it. So doing evaluation alone isn't good enough, and actually you should be doing evaluation alongside a user-centered design process. Otherwise, you're probably just solving creating ineffective products and potentially not solving the right problem. So if we could skip over to the next slide, Nick, we'll talk a little bit about how we're being guided in this process. So one of the sort of principles and things that we're applying into our work and methods that we're using is the CAST design principles. So we think they're a really great set of principles for just really underpinning a lot of your work, whether that's a product build or running a digital service. And we're being guided by all of these principles, but I'm just going to highlight a couple that we found really interesting. So for us, starting with user needs is absolutely the most important thing, and we have done that a lot from what Nick's already been talking about in terms of the research that we covered. And it's just, if you don't understand their needs or who they are as individuals, then you might be going off on the wrong track. So really starting there will make your life so much easier. The second one is the second factor around understanding what's out there already. For us, we really don't want to reinvent the wheel. We don't want to waste money, and we know that there's lots of good things going on already. So before you build anything, really understand who's already doing stuff. And we've had a hell of a lot of conversations along the way where we've sort of had to go, oh, let's stop a second and just double check we're not doing the same thing or we're not competing with each other. And that's might take time, and it does take time, and don't underestimate that. But it's actually really fruitful for knowing whether you're on the right track, combining efforts, or actually saying, oh, you guys are already doing this, let's add an extra section, or let's pull our funding together. We haven't done that yet, but it might come along as we go. And another one that's come up really sort of recently for us was number 6, about being inclusive. So we, throughout this process, have obviously moved into remote working and remote design sprints. And that for us threw up a whole host of challenges around how we make sure that we get a diverse range of input in the room, and we're not excluding particular groups based on their accessibility needs or the type of device that they own. So that's been a really useful challenge for us, and we can talk a little bit more about that later. Nick, thank you. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about how we have come up with or done some of the 4 steps in that user design centered process. So for us, understanding the problem, we have kind of focused on 3 areas, and I'm going to go through these in detail, but we had a really clear idea of who the users are. So we created user personas and really honed into who they are. We did a lot of research, as we've said, about what helps and hinders young people, and we also sort of refine these even further with young people to really understand what that means in their wider context. Our second area, so understanding the context of use and user requirements, we have run a whole bunch of focus groups with young people to really dig into a specific topic. We have run design sprints remotely with young people involved in all of those, and we've done lots of usability testing on our prototypes. And then finally, we're now in our third phase where we're designing, building and evaluating. And we have, for this phase, we currently have a young person steering group who are really helping to refine the solution and the features and functions of it. We're going to do some user acceptance testing later in the year, and some in-market testing as well. But I'm going to go into each of those now. So for the first one, our problem definition. This is just one example of a user persona that we created as part of our project. And we were really focused in on young people facing multiple disadvantage in Camden. And this is one of our examples, really honing in on who they are, what they're interested in, what support they need, and what barriers they face as an individual. And this just really helped us to sort of understand the context in which they're coming at it, and to not be sort of tokenistic or make massive assumptions because we might not have lived that experience. So for us, we have a host of about 5 different user personas with different, all different, completely different angles, but it really helps us to kind of empathize with their situation and really try and hone in on what's important to them. If you could flip to the next one. As I said before, we have run a whole bunch of focus groups. So this was when we were trying to understand what helps and hinders young people. And we were really interested in how on earth do we, what is important to them? We can't make assumptions about that. And where is their overlap and who is involved in their lives? And this is one of our colleagues with a rather large map that you saw as the interactive map. And that for us was just a really great chance to get young people in a room and really explore a topic in detail. And we tested this again and again with different groups of young people to really see whether it landed and resonated with them. And that for us has underpinned all of the research that we've done to date. Moved on to, we realised that for the 3 problems that we were tackling, or that young people face, were having a stable home, having a career of some sort, and living their best life or having some connection to their community. And we know that they're all massive issues, that there's a lot of work going on in those areas, and that we might not be best placed to jump in and solve one of those. So we thought, where could we add value, or where could technology add value, should I say? And so we looked at what underpins all 3 of those issues, and we found that regardless of the challenge that they're tackling, or that they're interested in solving, that young people just couldn't find services online. And on finding services online was one of the main routes in which young people tried to find support. And so we thought, let's explore that further. So let's have a look, dive into how do we make it easier for young people to find stuff online. And this diagram here is a bit of a map of the routes that young people take to finding services. And so we did a host of in-person focus groups with young people, thinking about, when you're trying to find support, who do you turn to, where do you go, what helps you along the way, where do you get stuck, what's annoying about that process. And this is just a really simple summarized version of the sort of roughly the 3 routes. And this is actually available online with a whole write-up, so I can share that with you guys afterwards. And so we were running sort of focus groups with sort of around 4 to 5 young people in each one, and just really sort of questioning them on what do you do first when you're trying to look for support? Why do you do that? What helps you? Where do you go next? What if that's not an option for you? Where would you go after that? And just really trying to understand at every point where there's a potential issue or where technology might be able to add value. So once we had a really good idea of that, we then moved on to design sprints. So this is a quick video, which I'm going to try and talk over as we go. So we used a piece of software that you're seeing now called Miro. And this is a design sprints, for anyone who doesn't know, is a Google process that we sort of modified for our own purposes, but it's a very quick, sort of usually 5-day method for coming up from a problem straight through to a potential prototype solution for your digital solution. And we as a team, both with youth practitioners and young people with lived experience, we ran sort of short half-day sessions online in the middle of lockdown, looking at this whole problem of how do we make it easier for young people to find stuff online. And we found so much value in running these online. We thought at first that they might be quite difficult to run, but actually once we'd overcome some of the barriers around access and use of the technology itself, we were really able to get a completely different range of young people in the room, and we're really able to put in their ideas. And as you can see here, we have lots of mapping and dotting and prioritizing. We also did a lot of sketching, so we would go away, independently draw as in our own rooms, and then upload images, add comments, ideas, and it just really allowed so many different young people to get involved. We also try to stab at drawing. We've got some doodles going on here, and really trying to understand what is most important to the young people. And this was something for us that just really added so much value to the process and meant that we could continue moving forward despite obviously some of the barriers that we're facing at the moment. And I would highly recommend it to anyone. We also have a lot of write-ups on this and sort of free resources on how to use this software and what we found, how we found it. But I would say that for us, this was absolutely so important. Having young people involved just gave us so much challenge, ideas, and just so much accountability to make sure that we were really questioning everything that we did. But one thing I would say is just to be really clear on why you're doing this and what value it brings to the process if you involve young people in each session. So for example, we and also just to make sure that the young person has all the information that they need, and they have the method that is most meaningful for them to engage. So in hindsight, I would probably say that we wouldn't run every single session with the young people in the same way that I did. I would absolutely involve them throughout, but potentially do some more upfront work in some of the sessions. So we had, for example, we had young people involved in every session of the sprints process, and I would recommend that we wouldn't, again, do the sort of user, one of the exercises, a user flow. So that's the sort of the journey that a young person takes when accessing the suggested app. And in hindsight, a lot of the young people found it slightly hard to use, and they hadn't necessarily done that before. They didn't quite understand the context, or they would want all of the features all at once, or they're not design experts, that's not their job. And actually it would have been far easier for us, and we found it far easier for them to engage when we had already put the legwork in and made some suggestions, and then they were able to critique and add to that. And so I guess my point there is that make sure that they understand the context you're operating in, make sure that they are able to engage with it meaningfully, and if they're not, do something about it, put in some legwork behind the scenes, bring in someone who's an expert in that topic who can talk to it, whatever it might be. Just make sure that whoever your user is has what they need to actually be able to engage in the right context, or remove them from that situation for that part of it, and then bring them back in with what you potentially think are the solutions, and then ask them to critique that and say what's meaningful for them. I think that added a lot of value to us. There's some really simple things. So for us, we have always paid for the young person's time, and I think that should, or whoever it is your user is, you should pay for their time. It should be valued. If everyone in the room is being paid, so should they. And I think that for us allowed reduced a lot of the barriers to engagement. Make sure that, really simple, make sure the software, the format and the time is convenient to your user group. So if the sessions are run during work hours and that all the young people are in school, for example, you're going to eliminate a whole group of young people, and just really think about who is missing from this room if we do it in this way. That might mean working late, that might mean doing shorter sessions, and whatever it might be, just make sure that it's convenient to them. Make sure they have the right device, so your software will dictate what device can be used. For example, Miro isn't suitable on phones, so you'd need a laptop or a tablet, and we had that as a barrier for some young people, but we were able, in a position and able to provide them with the technology that they needed. But just really think about what format you're going to use, and that will ultimately dictate who you have in the room. Make sure that you play back to those that you involve. So we put in a lot of effort, and I wouldn't underestimate the time that it takes to do this. We would play back what we had done after each of the design sprints. We would play back to the young people, this is what you said, this is what we did, and this is what's like we're going to do next. And we did that both for the design sprints and for our user testing sessions, and actually that was some of the most meaningful engagement that we had with young people. It really gave them a sense of, oh, you actually listened to us and you actually did something, because often they're consulted on something and then it goes away and they never hear anything. But actually this was really quick, rapid changes, and they could see from one session on Tuesday to the next session the next day, they could see what we had done that night, and what influence they'd had over the process, and that for them was really, really engaging, and they felt really listened to and seen and heard, which was great. One other thing I would just say is that we had a really interesting discussion about this today, actually, looking at make sure that you frame your discussions and the input in a way that's relatable to the user. So it could be something as simple as, today we want to have a discussion with you, and we're going to have a discussion with you in a Gogglebox style conversation. So we're going to show you something, and then we're going to record your reaction as you play around with the prototype, and just making sure that they kind of understand the context in which they're and their expectations of them, but do it in language or use scenarios that are relevant to them, rather than just sort of say, we're doing a user testing session. That to them might mean nothing, but think about, oh yeah, I understand what Gogglebox is, I understand that they record you and they check what your reaction is, and they use that to develop the prototype. That's more relatable. So just think about how you frame stuff, and don't necessarily use the language that makes sense to you in a business context, make sure that it's relevant to them. So that's a bit about our design sprints. But then there was one that's not the end goal. So that obviously came up with some great ideas, and this is a really quick screenshot of a smoke test prototype. This is not what it would look like in real life, but it's a sort of live navigable prototype where you can click around and have a play and see what it might look like in practice. And so we ran remote, again, user testing sessions, and they were sort of more like small focus groups of about 4 to 5 young people in each breakout room, looking at the prototype. They could go around, play on it. We had really specific scenarios that we gave them and asked them to go and play and add comments. So you can add them directly into Figma, that's the software that we used, but also to just have a discussion about how they're experiencing it, what they liked about it, what was important to them, what wasn't important to them. And it helped us to build up a really quick idea of what features were important, what weren't, and whether we were hitting the mark or not. Ideally, you do them more one-to-one and be able to see specifically their reactions, but we found this as a really quick and easy way to get input from a broad range of young people whilst we were doing a quick sort of prototyping. But I'd recommend one-to-one sessions as well, and that's what we'll do in the future. But for us, it was a really great way of engaging the young people and showing them what their input had done and how we'd actually acted on that. So we're now in the sort of third phase of this project, where we're actually going to be designing, building and evaluating our specific solution. So as Nick mentioned, we are building a progressive web app, which really focuses on how young people can find services. And in the last phase, we really focused on young people being involved in every single part of the process, where we were exploring and understanding their context and really understanding what they need. In this phase, we are very much more focused on how does that look, how does that feel, and actually building the product. So that's there's a slight shift in emphasis, and young people don't necessarily want or need to be involved in all of those decisions, and quite frankly probably don't want to, because it will probably be a lot of admin. So we have opted for a young person steering group, and we are going to have a selection of 10 young people from different urban areas across England, and we are currently in the process of recruiting those young people. They are going to meet likely virtually once a month for 1.5 hours. Their aim is to help steer us, to keep us accountable, and to really help us hone in on the product refinements. So thinking about the most important features, thinking about the things like the tone and the way that we categorize data, and all of the kind of things that really make the product work for them. And they are going to be keeping me to account and the whole team to account throughout this process. As I said before, we value their time and want to pay them for their time, so they will be reciprocated for all of the meetings that they attend. And if we were meeting face-to-face, we'd also cover that, but for the time being, it'll be virtual. We are also doing some user acceptance testing. So for us, again, that's likely to be virtual, and that's very sort of similar to the previous user testing that we've done, but that's very much around sort of, is this usable? Is this right? Does it work? And would you engage with this? And again, we would very much pay for their time. What that looks like in terms of numbers and things we are yet to iron out, but that's very much something that we will want to be doing as the product starts to build and becomes whole. And then once we have our sort of proof of concept and are ready to release it to the market, we will have a host of beta testers. These are going to be young people who are volunteer and who are introduced to the app, likely via their youth workers or other sort of networks and charities, but they're very much, we feel that will be the route that they are sort of driven through, as this is not something that's going straight out as a product. This is something that we want testing, but this is very much something that we want a whole range of young people to engage with. So we'll try where possible to make sure that this is sort of promoted to a broad range of networks, and that it's not just those who would always volunteer to test something, or so we really want to get a diverse range of young people. But that's a lot about how we're going to do it practically, but I'm going to hand back over to Nick, who's going to talk us through some more of where we're going and what this all means for us.
Great, thank you, Kathryn. So just briefly then, to highlight or summarise where we are in the journey, here's our kind of high-level roadmap. So as you can see, we're in early October, and at this point we are still in the messy sort of scoping phase of the work, where we're thinking about product refinement and feature refinement. We're in the middle of onboarding our various partners. That includes recruiting a local authority to be our pilot area, and we know we'll be needing to work very closely with them. It also involves tendering for a digital agency, and we've just completed that process. And of course also engaging with our key charity partners that I mentioned earlier, as well as our funders. In terms of development, we hope to kick that off in November, all going well. Of course, needing to be flexible to kind of the environment and context that we're working in at the moment, and it is possible that we'll need to push development back based on how easily the local authority is able to engage in this work, given other priorities currently. And then, as Kathryn mentioned, the Young Person Steering Group is going to be really heavily involved throughout. So they are, once recruited, will be supporting us in our scoping, and then we'll also run user acceptance testing throughout development process, and users will, of course, also be involved in market testing. So what does our messy scoping phase look like? It's a combination of feature refinement, it's a combination of data and working out what we need to do with data, and it's a combination of working with our partners to really understand what we're trying to do and how we do it. So in terms of feature refinement, that involves looking and mapping our broad features, defining our user stories, prioritizing our features and stories, and then really getting into development after that. In terms of data, we're envisaging needing to map the local service ecosystem and also trying to think holistically about what services look like for young people. So we're not just talking about support services, but it could also be about recreational activities that support their well-being. It could also be about career opportunities and work experience opportunities that enable them to get that foot on the ladder. So thinking holistically about the ecosystem in which they're working and living in, and how we can surface the right information for them. We'll also then need to think about how we collect and review that data quality, and then think about how we categorize that data in ways that make it meaningful to young people, and where the content is engaging to them and speaks to them on their terms. We're expecting to need to do quite a lot of data improvement, and so when we enter into sprint development for actually beginning to build the features, we also expect to be working behind the scenes to improve data, and that will involve some data entry. Alongside that, our partnerships, as I mentioned, working closely with the local authority, so agreeing that geography is happening at the moment. Defining our target groups, we think we'll still be working with the 15 to 18 age bracket, but that might shift depending on the priorities of the local authority we work with. And then once we actually have an agreed local authority partner, we'll then kick off work to begin engaging other local stakeholders in the area, from youth worker networks to schools, to charities, to employers in the local community that might be offering opportunities for young people. So lots to do and to keep us busy. And then in terms of the scope, we have had some really interesting conversations recently internally to really hone in on what we think is achievable within this first round of development. We are obviously working within a specific budget. We also want to make sure that we are only developing what is absolutely crucial to answer our questions. So for that reason, we believe that in terms of what's out of scope, we won't be doing any server-side development. We won't be doing any bespoke CMS development. We won't be tackling geolocation or integration with other apps and platforms. And we won't also be doing any user authentication. So all young people accessing the app will be doing so anonymously. And that also, in some ways, will help us, because we think that will remove the barrier to entry, and that young people who express sort of concerns over their data and privacy in previous rounds of research will not have that barrier in using this round of the app. So what is in scope? We believe we'll be using some sort of off-the-shelf CMS platform or a spreadsheet with conversion utility. Obviously, user experience and user interface design and development will be really important. And then, of course, data integration as well, making sure that the data that we are collecting, that we are sort of consolidating and categorizing in new ways, is a kind of key part of this phase. We do think that we'll be working with static data for this proof of concept, with the intention that if we were to develop the product fully, that would then obviously be live data, where sort of booking services onto sort of booking places onto services, for instance, or activities might be updated live, but not for this round. So I hope that gives you a bit of a flavour of what we're trying to do, and thank you to Kathryn for a really detailed, interesting overview of how we're approaching user-centred design for this work. We've got a lot to learn, and we are really keen to share that learning and to have as many conversations with the sector and with anyone that's interested as we can. So that leaves me just to say thank you for listening, and do get in touch with any questions or comments or reflections on what we're trying to do. Kathryn, did you want to say any final words?
No, just I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it was useful. And yeah, as Nick said, please do get in touch. We mentioned on the last slide something called NPC Labs, and that's where we're publishing all of the articles that I've mentioned throughout, and all of our learning. And so please feel free to comment on there or to have a read. But just get in touch. We'd love to chat.